So we've got our Photoshop files all set up, and now we've opened up After Effects. When you first open up After Effects, this is what your sort of main window looks like. Uh, a lot of gray boxes, like a lot of Adobe products. When you first open them up, they're very empty. So we want to take our Photoshop file and have it as a new composition inside of here. First things first, let me just go over some navigation. This is your project folder. So imagine After Effects being like a hybrid of Photoshop and Premiere. So just like in Premiere down here, you'd have your like bin with all your project things. It's just up here in After Effects. In Photoshop, you have your layers over there. They're over here now because they're much more spread out. And just like in Premiere, I've got a timeline here. And sometimes else too in Photoshop, if you're working with a timeline, you've got a timeline that shows up there. These are sort of tool properties and libraries. And then over here at the very top is our toolbox. And you'll notice a lot of tools are grayed out because we have nothing to work with right now. And then also too, we've got sort of our layers, or sort of our tabs. So whatever window you're working in has always got that blue box around it, just like in Premiere. And I'm just going to go File, Import. You could create a new composition, but we want our composition to be based on our Photoshop file. So I'm going to go Import File. I'm going to find my Shakespeare portrait. Once again, it's really important to be sort of organized with After Effects. Like InDesign and Premiere, it doesn't put everything in the one big master project file. So importantly, if you're moving from computer to computer, it's important that everything's in one folder. And most importantly, you can work off of a hard drive, but you cannot and should not work off of a USB stick or an SD card. They don't send and transfer data fast enough and will cause After Effects to crash, and it might actually be damaging to both of them as well. So please just spend 2 seconds, throw everything onto the desktop, create a little folder, and just be a little bit organized. And basically you want to save your project into this folder as well. So I'm going to select my Shakespeare portrait PSD. And then before I click open, I'm going to go to import as, and instead of footage, I'm going to change that to composition retain layer sizes. If I import it as footage, it's going to take all those layers that I made and all the time I spent into that and just flatten it out and just treat it like an image, which is not what I want. I want to have my layers. I want to animate them. So I need to say contain composition, retain layer sizes. If I don't say that, it kind of changes the scale of everything and centers everything in the middle of the screen. It gets a bit annoying later. So click that and click create composition, make sure that's selected. A Photoshop sequence would be if you are working with a timeline of Photoshop and you want to bring those images in, but since that's not what we have in our thing, we're just going to ignore that for the moment and click open. Once again, it's going to ask you this again, composition retain layer sizes, and we want to say editable layer styles. Yeah, we don't want to merge layers because once again, it's trying to like defeat the purpose. So I'm going to say editable layer styles, and I'm going to press OK. And now, what I now have in my project windows is two things. I've got this little thing with this little icon. That little icon there represents that it's a composition. So if I double click on it, boom, I've got everything sort of opened up. Just inside of that, just to show you, these are all the separate layers as separate images. I can hover over them, you can kind of see, there it is. But here's my composition. Like I said, Photoshop, my layers are over there. Boom, they're now over here. I've got my will layer, I've got my background layer, and I've got like a duplicate background layer. That one's junk, so I'm just going to select and just press delete and get rid of it. So just hit the delete key on the keyboard to select and delete a layer. If you want to change a layer name, just hit the enter key. And you notice that if you double click on something, you've got like it on top of your thing. There are tabs here. They don't look like tabs, they're tabs. So if you double click on it, it opens it up accidentally. It's usually something that freaks students out and they're like, what's gone wrong? I can't see my thing. You just double clicked. Yeah. If you hit the enter key, you can change the layer name. So I can just call it background. And like Photoshop, if you look at the sort of icons over here, these are very similar to what you have for your layer names and the sort of tabs you have inside of Photoshop. You've got the eyeball icon, turns the layer on and off. The lock key locks it. So I'm going to lock my background layer because I'm not going to move my background. It's going to just be there. And then I've got this other one that's kind of important to look out for. That little dot, if I select that, it's called solo. It just selects that layer. That's a fun one to click at 2 a.m. when you got a deadline and you don't know what's going on and why you only see one layer. It's because you might have accidentally clicked that. Later on when we do the rose petals, you might just want to see one layer, so you might use that. It does have a good function, but when you're starting off, it's more of a thing that causes panic. We're going to spend a lot of time looking down here at these sort of layer settings. There's a lot of options. You'll notice that if you don't see any of these, make sure that down here in the lower right left-hand corner that they're turned on. You'll see that changes to the sort of feature options I see there. So I could have the duration and time code and all that. I could have the opacity there. I could turn that off. I could have the layer settings. I'm going to look at these two features right now. And you notice it takes up quite a bit of real estate as well. You can shrink that as well, just like with anything, you can customize it so it fits a little bit more. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to show you just a few things down here at this navigation panel. So down here we've got this sort of setup for our view. If you don't want to see the guides, you could turn the guides off. If you want to see a title action safe grid, you could turn that on there or turn that off there. You could change the scale of your view from 100% to, I don't know, 25%. Depending on if you're animating, sometimes you need to kind of see the whole thing, depending on how big your screen is, how much space you have to work with, and Fit will fit that to your screen. You can also use the trackpad or the wheel on your mouse to kind of zoom in and out as well. And just like with Photoshop, if you hold down the space bar and kind of click and drag, that lets you kind of navigate around as well without accidentally moving something. With this little icon turned on here, this lets me see if I've got a layer selected, like if I select Will, it creates a little box that I can grab to move him and change him around on, so I can adjust his scale with that. Hold down the Shift key if you want to maintain its proportions. You can see he's kind of big. He fits quite well. If you scale him down, you can pull out some more of his body if you want to play around with that. So, okay, I adjusted his scale by doing that. The other thing to look at here is the time code, which is where this little blue guitar pick and line is in time. So those two are connected, just like in Premiere Pro, your preview window, or here it's called your composition window, is connected to where the playhead, this blue guitar pick, is located. To zoom in and out on your timeline, down here you've got these little mountain icons, just like in Photoshop. And if you zoom in, you can see where you are in time. So I'm down to single frames. There's 20 frames, 21 frames, yeah? If I zoom out, that gives me sort of a larger sort of idea of the time. You'll find yourself shifting between scale and stuff depending on what you're doing. You'll notice that you've got this little thing. This lets me see the portion of time that's selected. Also too, I can adjust the scale of time by stretching that out as well and pushing that back together. You'll notice that here, I've got a second one of those little handles. That's my end of my composition, but you notice I can't drag it out past 30 seconds, which is really annoying. If I wanted my thing to be longer or shorter, if I want to change anything about the composition settings, I want to go Composition, Composition Settings, or if you want the keyboard shortcut, it's Command K, like composition if you spelled it the way it sounds, yeah? So if I go to Composition Settings, if you want to change the length of your composition, you can change it here. Also, to just make sure that you're working in the correct format. Sometimes it defaults when you take a Photoshop file in for the very first time to 29.97. So you want to make sure it's 1920 by 1080. Make sure that that's not clicked when you're changing your numbers. You want to have a frame rate of 24 because that's what we animate at here in the UK. Full resolution, don't drop that because it's what you want to have. You can see that we'll change that in just a second. I'll explain why. And then duration, this is how long it is. Just a reminder to read time code. Time code is frames over here on the far right by seconds. So there's 24 frames in a second. Your seconds, there's 60 of those in a minute. There's your minutes there, 60 of those in an hour. Now, you never really work with full hours. Usually with After Effects, you're working on a scene by scene sort of thing. So if you are working with hours, it might be really, really slow. So keep in mind that, you are usually working with seconds and stuff. And if you want to change that, let's say 30 is too long. If I want to change this to 15 seconds, I can just change that time code there. Also, you can change the background color, but just a quick note. The background color that you change here will always defaultly be black when it renders out. If you've changed it to pink or blue or whatever other color you want to work with, and you think that's going to be the color it renders out as, that's not true. It's only for in the work area you see that color. In later videos, I'll talk about adding a different sort of solid background to get that same sort of color. But for today, just to let you know that the background color, you can change it if it makes it easier to work with, but you can't render that out. It's not a permanent background color. I'm going to press OK. I'm happy with those changes. I've changed it to 15 seconds. So you'll notice that this will change when I press OK. Boom. There it is. 15 seconds now. It automatically defaults to that. I can stretch it so I can see my whole timeline there. Full is the resolution that I'm seeing my animation playback. If it feels like it's really slow on your computer, you can take that down to half quality when you're playing it back, or even a third or a quarter, and that just means it will play back faster and smoother, but I've got nothing animated right now. So you'll see sometimes you'll drop that. There's some additional features here that go into sort of more complicated things for later on when you're doing more advanced stuff in After Effects. I'll go over those later on in other videos, but for now, that is really important to look at. Yeah? All right, so in the next video, I'll show you guys how to start animating.